Now that we've looked at some of the terminology and the fundamentals of integrated pest management, we're going to learn to identify various common greenhouse pests, and we're going to look at different methods for preventing and treating those common greenhouse pests. In this lecture, we're going to look at aphids, and aphids are by far the most common greenhouse pest in growing environments, and if you're growing in an aquaponic system, it is pretty much guaranteed that you are going to see aphids at some point during the normal operation of your system. Aphids are a sap-sucking pest that passively ingest phloem fluid from the plants. So they pierce their mouth feeding part into the plant tissue and they suck sap fluid out of the plant, and that's how they feed. Because their primary food source is sap and phloem fluid, they're essentially ingesting straight sugar water, so their presence is often noted by honeydew droplets on the plants and the growing equipment. So honeydew is the waste that the aphids produce, and it is essentially concentrated sugar water. So it's a very tacky, sticky substance that gets all over the plants and all over the growing equipment that the plants are growing on. And so very commonly, if you're growing in NFT gutters, you will see tacky substance, the honeydew, on the lids of the NFT gutters. Secondary to a honeydew problem on your growing equipment, typically because it's a high sugar environment, very commonly it leads to mold or mildew growing on the honeydew. Aphids cause crop damage primarily by introducing fungal diseases and pathogens into the plant tissue as they're feeding. Aphids are a particularly aggressive pest because they can reproduce sexually or asexually, and we're going to dig deeper into this in the coming slides, but this is one of the big reasons why aphids can run rampant through a greenhouse very quickly, is they can reproduce incredibly fast. Some key characteristics when identifying an aphid are the large oval or roundish body. They have 6 long, very thin legs, and they have 2 long, slender antennae. Additionally, on their abdomen, they have what are called cornicles, and these are long appendages that protrude backwards off of the abdomen. Often, integrated pest management plans for addressing an aphid outbreak in your greenhouse depend on you being able to identify the specific species of aphid that is causing your crop damage. When trying to distinguish between different species of aphids, there are a couple of key focal points that you're going to want to look at. The first thing that we're going to want to look at is the body shape and the color of the body. Additionally, antenna length, coloration, and shape can all play into identifying exactly which species of aphid you're looking at and trying to treat for. This one seems a little weird, but the shape and coloration of the frontal tubercles of the aphid, the part that sticks out at the base of the antenna, is a key characteristic that is very helpful in identifying what species of aphid you're looking at and what species of aphid you're trying to treat for. The color and shape and size of the cornicles is also a key characteristic that we're going to want to look at when trying to identify one species of aphid from another, as well as the color and shape of the cauda, which is the small portion protruding from the back of the abdomen. Lastly, we're going to want to look at leg coloration, particularly focusing on the bottommost part of the foot of the aphid, as the color of that part of the leg very commonly allows us to distinguish between different types of aphids. As a point of reference, in these pictures we see the different body shapes, configurations of the frontal tubercles, and the cornicle shapes and coloration for different common greenhouse aphids. As we can see here, there are very different body shapes and caudal shapes to the green peach tree aphid, the potato aphid, the buckthorn aphid, and the foxglove aphid. the foxglove aphid almost entirely doesn't have a cauda, while the potato aphid has a very, very long cauda. Additionally, we can see differences in the front of the face and the tubercle area of these aphids. And as we can see by looking at the coloration of the cornicles, the foxglove aphid is easily distinguished from the other three aphids by the dark tip on the end of its cornicles. In understanding why aphids are such a common and very aggressive pest in growing environments, we want to look at their reproductive rates. Populations can grow from 1 to 600 billion in a single growing season, and this seems absolutely outrageous until you take a few things into account. Firstly, parthenogenic females can hatch in the spring and reproduce asexually, so they don't even need to find a mate. This means that a parthenogenic female can enter your growing environment all on her lonesome and begin producing babies. Additionally, aphids can be viviparous, skipping the egg phase and giving birth to live young, an even faster method for cranking out babies and increasing the population in your growing environment very quickly. Lastly, stress such as a low food supply actually triggers the growth of wings so that the young can relocate to areas of your growing environment where there's more food. So when addressing aphid outbreaks, this is really important to keep in mind. It's not uncommon for me to hear stories about somebody having a small localized aphid problem on a couple of plants in their greenhouse. So they aggressively spray that plant, and the aphids will actually up and move to other locations in the growing environment where they're less stressed out because there's not as much spray. So it's not uncommon to hear horror stories about people chasing an aphid infestation around their growing environment. So when addressing aphids in a greenhouse environment or in a growing environment, they reproduce incredibly fast, they're incredibly aggressive, and they frequently move around the growing environment. All of these factors make aphids the perfect candidates for an integrated pest management plan. And even in growing environments that might not use a broad-reaching integrated pest management plan to prevent things like thrip outbreaks or whitefly infestations, pretty much everybody has some sort of integrated pest management plan for dealing with aphids and preventing an aphid infestation, because integrated pest management plans, when managed properly, allow you to knock out the aphids as they arrive into the growing environment before they have a chance to increase in population. So we're going to look at some different biological controls of aphids and beneficial insects that we very commonly utilize in growing environments to prevent an outbreak of aphids. The first beneficial insect that we're going to look at is the Aphidius wasp. Aphidius wasps have long, slender bodies and large, flat wings. These wasps are relatively host-specific, so you're going to want to know what species of aphid you are trying to combat in your growing environment, or know what type of aphids are typically found in your geography so that you can set up an integrated pest management plan that's utilizing the proper Aphidius wasps for the aphids that you might be needing to combat. Common species of Aphidius wasps that are utilized in many integrated pest management plans are Aphidius urbi and Aphidius matricarii. When purchasing Aphidius wasps for your growing environment, it's not uncommon to purchase a mix of Aphidius urbi and Aphidius matricarii. This is because these two species of wasps, between the two of them, prey on most of the aphids that you'll see in a greenhouse environment. Aphidius wasps pretty much have one purpose, and that is to kill aphids. They kill aphids by puncturing the body, and often deposit eggs inside of the body of the aphids. Though some recent studies have shown that Aphidius wasps have a habit of killing aphids, even if they're not eating those aphids or depositing eggs into those aphids. So Aphidius wasps have been shown to kill aphids just for fun. So when I give tours of greenhouse environments and I talk about Aphidius wasps in the greenhouse environment, more frequently than not, somebody in the tour will pipe up and mention that they're allergic to wasps, or they haven't seen any wasps flying around the greenhouse environment. But Aphidius wasps, though they have this incredibly intense and dangerous sounding name, are incredibly small. So here we see the scale of an Aphidius wasp, and this is an Aphidius wasp sitting on a bok choy leaf. There he is. They are incredibly small. Here's a more close-up picture of what an Aphidius wasp looks like under a microscope. Again, we see the long, slender body, the flat, broad wings, and the long antenna. So as mentioned before, the mechanism of attack typically involves the wasp puncturing the body of the aphid and depositing an egg. Here on the left-hand side, we see a healthy aphid. On the right-hand side, we see a parasitized aphid, and we can start to see the larva developing inside of the aphid. As this progresses, the larva will continue to develop, and the aphid will die. On the left-hand photo, we see the larva inside of the aphid's body. And on the right-hand photo, we see the aphid after the wasp has left the aphid's body. Here we can see the wasp exit hole where the wasp cut its way out of the body of the aphid. Parasitized aphids will become dark in coloration as the larva grows, and prior to the wasp exiting will develop a papery brown coloration. It's important to be able to distinguish between healthy aphids and parasitized aphids when making decisions about how to handle an aphid outbreak in your greenhouse, and whether to utilize a spray or not. I've been called into greenhouses a couple of times where the greenhouse operator says that they have an outbreak of aphids on a couple of pepper plants or a couple of eggplants, and it's getting out of control and they're going to spray, and they want me to come look at it to help them spray and ensure that they're doing the spraying right. And so immediately it goes, there's a lot of aphids, I'm going to spray. In a number of instances, after closer examination of the undersides of the leaves, we've noticed that a very large percent of the aphids that we were seeing were actually parasitized. And so yes, in those instances there were a lot of aphids attacking those pepper plants. But now there's a lot of aphids hosting beneficial predatory wasps, and most of those aphids are already dead. So in those instances, we're going to want to try to remove any of the healthy aphids by squishing them or spraying very targeted sprays in different areas of the plants. But we don't want to just broadcast spray the plants because we're going to knock back our population of beneficials. Once those wasps emerge, they're going to immediately find the other healthy aphids that are around those plants and kill them. And whichever wasps it was that was laying the eggs in those parasitized aphids, they're probably already hunting down the few healthy aphids that are on those plants. So in some instances, it can be better to just let the natural cycle occur and let the Aphidius wasps do their jobs, and not just arrive with heavy sprays every time we see any aphids on any of our plants. So it's a good thing to be able to distinguish between healthy aphids and parasitized aphids. Additionally, looking at the ratio of healthy aphids to parasitized aphids when you do find aphids in your greenhouse gives you some indication of how the population of Aphidius wasps are faring. If you go into your greenhouse and one day you find the underside of a leaf has 25 or 30 aphids on it, and the rest of your greenhouse is pretty clean, and none of those aphids are parasitized, you probably don't have a stable population of Aphidius wasps in your greenhouse, because Aphidius wasps can sense the pheromones that aphids release when they're feeding, and when they're directing the other aphids in the area to join them in their feast. So when you have aphids feeding, it doesn't take long for the Aphidius wasps to show up. Typically, the Aphidius wasps will hunt down and find and kill the aphids in your growing environment before you even know they're there. So if you come along a leaf and you flip it over and the majority of the aphids or all of the aphids are perfectly healthy, you probably don't have a very good stable population of Aphidius wasps in your growing environment. If you turn that same leaf over and you find that 90% of the aphids are already parasitized, you have a very healthy population of Aphidius wasps, and I would recommend not spraying for those aphids right away. Keep an eye on that location and ensure that your Aphidius wasps are following through, but think twice before spraying anything that moves or looks like a bug, even if it is a pest. So when purchasing Aphidius wasps or bringing Aphidius wasps into your growing environment, they're typically purchased as parasitized aphids in bottles of substrate as pictured here. The substrate is deposited on and around the infected plants. When introducing any sort of beneficial insects into your growing environment, be sure to follow all of the supplier's instructions related to proper storage and implementation of those beneficial insects. Another common beneficial that's used in managing aphid populations in growing environments is aphidolite midges. These are small midges whose larvae feed on aphids. Aphidolite midges are released as pupa in substrate, similarly to how Aphidius wasps are purchased. Aphidolite midges are most effective in media beds as the larvae require a substrate in which to pupate. Typically, aphidolite midges aren't utilized in hydroponic or aquaponic environments, but they can be useful in addressing aphid problems in the media beds of your growing environment. The larvae of these aphidolite midges pierce the aphids, inject the aphid with toxins, and then suck out the body fluids from the aphids. It seems these days that we can't have a discussion about integrated pest management for even a few minutes before somebody thinks of or blurts out ladybugs. And people often, when they set up a growing environment, they go to their hardware store and they see the little bags of ladybugs and they think, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a bunch of ladybugs, I'm going to release them inside of my growing environment, and they are going to solve my aphid problems. And while, yes, ladybugs do eat aphids, they only eat aphids in their larval stages. And the larval stages, pictured on the right-hand side, are incredibly immobile. They pretty much hang out on the plant and even sometimes on the leaf of the plant where they were laid and where they hatched, and they don't move around a lot. So when we're talking about having to address aphid problems in a greenhouse, particularly given the rapid reproduction rates of aphids and the fact that aphids can move around our growing environment when they feel stressed out, we're going to want something that's a bit more aggressive of a feeder and moves around a little bit more aggressively as well. So while yes, ladybugs do eat aphids, they're not typically utilized in integrated pest management plans. They're nice to have around your growing environment, but bang for buck, they're really not doing a great job of managing your aphid populations in your greenhouse. As mentioned before, integrated pest management involves a balance of beneficial predatory insects and soft sprays and chemical sprays being utilized appropriately in your growing environment to manage and treat for different type of pest outbreaks. And one of the most common soft sprays that is utilized in aquaponic growing environments, and I highly recommend you always keep this on hand in your growing environment, is neem oil. Neem oil is very effective against many greenhouse pests, including whiteflies and aphids, and it can be used to treat a number of molds and mildews in your growing environment, so a very good thing to have on hand. It's important to note when utilizing neem oil that neem oil sprays are toxic to fish, so you should avoid spraying them heavily near your fish tanks, around the edges of your deep water culture float bed, and around the air intakes of your air blowers. So we don't want to spray this stuff all over the place. We don't want to use neem oil in a manner that we're soaking our plants and the neem oil is running off of our plants and into our system water. So we do want to take some care and precautions when utilizing neem oil spray, but honestly, neem oil is going to become your best friend. You're going to learn to love the smell of it. At first, you're going to hate the smell, but eventually you'll learn that the smell of neem oil means a hell of a lot less work for you in managing and treating the pest populations in your greenhouse. Atomizers, as pictured in the photo here, are a great tool to fog large greenhouse environments with neem oil solution. And as a note, when you're using sprays, even if they are soft sprays such as neem oil, always follow the pesticide labels and application laws in your area, and please wear proper personal protection equipment such as goggles and gloves. And if you're fogging a greenhouse with any sort of spray, wear a proper chemical respirator. There are a couple of people that I feel when they listen to this lecture, they're going to be smirking, because I used to regularly not wear a respirator when spraying and fogging with neem oil. And I had some splitting headaches when I would get done spraying the neem oil. And it was one of those things where you spray and you think, yeah, it's not that bad. And then you walk out into fresh air and you go, oh my God, the fresh air smells so good, it tastes so good, and I need a hell of a lot of Advil. Avoid the headaches. Wear a respirator when you're fogging with neem oil. If you're spot spraying on your plants, it might not be necessary, but definitely if you're using an atomizer and you're trying to fog a large greenhouse with neem oil, wear the respirator, wear the goggles, wear the gloves. Another very simple, soft spray can be made from listerine and dish soap. And this spray is effective against many soft-bodied pests and is very safe to handle. This spray involves adding 3 tablespoons of Listerine mouthwash, and it should be proper Listerine because it's an inactive ingredient in Listerine that makes this spray work so well. Additionally, you're going to use 1 tablespoon of dish soap. Typically, I like to use Dawn dish soap. And you're going to put the 3 tablespoons of Listerine and the 1 tablespoon of dish soap into a small hand spray bottle and fill it with lukewarm water. This spray should be applied to all surfaces of the infested plants, particularly to the undersides of leaves, because again, contact is key when utilizing sprays to address greenhouse pests. If you just spray the plant, most of the spray is going to end up on the upper sides of the leaves, and most greenhouse pests are found on the undersides of leaves. The important thing with the dish soap here is that the soap acts as a surfactant, which allows the chemicals in the Listerine to enter the insect's breathing pores, which kills the pests.